I've been recently looking at some of the usage statistics on D&D that other content creators like Sly Flourish have been running, and I realized that about 80% of games now are currently online, and it's probably not going to go down very much, given that we're pretty much normalizing in our sort of post-pandemic state. One thing I kind of wanted to do is get a better understanding and see if maybe I could propagate some better usage of some online tools that I use to run D&D online. For context, I've been running a campaign for about 14 months, currently level 9. I've run several one-shots, level 3, level 5, level 8, and a level 20 one-shot, all of which have been pretty well received. So our focus now is I'm keen to get an understanding of sort of where people are finding challenges, so please do let me know in the comments down below. But on top of that, just how I can better propagate usage. So I'll show you my virtual tabletop solution that I use. I'm going to have a different video going through sort of everything that I use and like general ideas and recommendations. I've tried a fair few different pieces here. But Roll20 is my virtual tabletop of choice. I've more or less bought into the ecosystem, so I can't really change, but I mean, that's kind of true across the board. So I guess we'll just quickly jump in, and I'm going to show you guys how to sort of build out from Roll20 from the ground up. This will include loading in your own maps, loading in player characters, tokens, those different pieces. This is probably not going to be a good player guide for Roll20, but I also find that the Character Mancer is a pretty intuitive sort of ground up solution for that. It tends to not be a big issue with player onboarding. So if we jump over to my desktop, I'm going to just completely create a brand new game. I have a test game that I use just to test macros and pieces. I get pretty advanced with Roll20. I wouldn't sweat that at all. But if you're a new DM, what you will be doing is just creating a new game. From here, we're going to name our game. I'm just going to call it My New Game. Actually, you know what? I'm going to call it Surrounding Calamities, because this will actually probably be the one that I use for my next campaign that I'm building. We're going to choose our optional character sheets. I'm just going to go straight with the D&D 5e by Roll20. You don't really need to get too fancy with it. And it'll even show you like a little preview. And then I'm ready to create the game. Now, there's a few things that you can do here. First thing is you have an invite players button. The invite players button obviously is the link that you use to invite your players. Nice and easy. When they're in, you can then assign their character sheets. Of course, you have to create those first. Settings, just very quickly. I think there are some really easy key game settings. You don't want public access unless you really do. And then allowing players to import their own characters is always nice if they are like a pro level Roll20 subscriber, that sort of thing. Your default game settings you can go in. I think that you don't really need to touch anything in here specifically other than maybe allowing... No, actually, this is all fine. Dynamic lighting, however, if you are a pro subscriber, you'll get dynamic lighting. You can turn that on, so every token by default has dynamic lighting and their vision is turned on. It just saves you from doing it when you build out individual tokens. I wouldn't worry about that right now. This is sort of aimed at beginners, so that's fine. If you can understand what these settings are, then you're pretty set. Your compendium settings. This is generally where you have your sharing slots. So I can share my slots with 5 games. You see I've got 2 of my one-shots in here, plus my overall campaign. My cat's being annoyed in the back. So I'm going to actually share my compendium with this game, which is nice and easy. And then it'll show sort of like I can choose individually. If I want to, I can choose which books do get shared. Save those settings. And then Character Mancer for level 1, roll queries, always roll advanced. Like all of these are pretty standard. I would set the I would set it to always whisper rolls to the GM. This is because you can undo it for your character sheets, but every NPC token you drop in otherwise will roll publicly. Real pain. Don't want to do that. Some people like rolling ahead, but I like to use HP and specific rolls as like a way of like tweaking balance if I've like over or under balanced an encounter. And then I pretty much everything else here should be absolutely fine. Save those changes. Those are the only things I recommend changing. We can just go straight back to our campaign. And let's actually jump in. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to before I do this, I'm going to explain what these different tools are. Your select tool and your pan view tool are pretty easy. I pretty much don't use pan view. Generally, if you are zoomed in, you can move around with your right mouse button, and you can select with your left mouse button. If you hold, it'll actually ping. Your players can see this unless you're in the GM layer, in which case they can't. Your different layers are your map background layers, so everything behind your tokens, everything like that's the floor of your map. Your object and token layers, which is like things that you can move around that your players can see. And then your GM info layer is basically where you keep your tokens when you're not actively using them, like you don't want them to be visible to your players. It's also where you keep specific bits of info. So if you load in like a module for a game, which we're probably going to do shortly after this, that's where that'll live. You can draw, shape. Your players do get easy access to these pieces as well. And from there, you can sort of build out like specific bits of geometry, notes. Allow your players to draw on this is absolutely fine as well. I use it to track travel across overworld maps. I'll use the line polygon tool, and I'll be like, okay, it's on a hex map. You know, you've gone here, 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 and that's taken, you know, X days. And then you can lock that in. So those are all pieces that you can use. I don't use the effects at all. You can if you want. I find that they lag a little bit, so I just ignore them. And then zoom, don't use it all. Mouse wheel, nice and easy. And then your measurement tool, however, you will use quite a bit. This is going to be useful for your players and for yourselves to measure the ranges. I know that this isn't 5 feet. It's actually 7, 10. You know, this isn't 20 feet. It's, you know, plus 4, 8. It's 28 feet. But, you know, this is D&D. Every circle is actually a square on a grid map. Your lighting tool just lets you put lights around the area for your players' dynamic vision. As you load in a map, maybe like if there's a torch on the map, you put a light there so your players can see. If they don't have dark vision, they'll be able to see in that area. And then you can hide specific areas manually for non-dynamic lighting. And your turn order, this tool is the turn order tool. Basically, you pull this up, and then any initiative rolls that happen will be tracked automatically. I'll be able to show you that later. And then finally, you've got your dice tools. Selecting the GM will whisper the roll to the GM. That's for players and for the GM. So if I want to whisper myself 4d20 to see how people go on a perception roll, I can see there's a nat 20, a nat 1, a 10, and an 18. So easy, easy, easy. And then the other pieces are your shortcut references. I don't use shortcuts too much. It's probably quite good to learn, especially switching between layers quickly, but it's not something that I think is a high priority. Let's jump in and talk about giving your players their character sheets. So I recommend that you keep your player characters in a specific folder. So I think we're just going to make a folder, call it PCs for player characters. And nice and easy there. We're going to add handouts. We're going to add a character here. I'm just going to assign them to whatever. We're going to call this one Jack Smith. And what we're going to do, normally what you'd want to do is Jack Smith's character should only be controlled by Jack. It should be in all players' journals, but it should be only editable by Jack. When you start a game, what I would do is I would set it to be editable by all players so that so Jack's not waiting around for you to assign this sheet, because until he joins the game, you can't assign it to him until he's actually joined. So having it set to all players and just naming it after the players' real names and then letting them go in and tweak and change it. And then what you can do is before session 1, you can go back, you can remove the all players, you can set it to Jack, and you're all done. That's pretty easy. I don't think that's too big an ask or too difficult. So we're going to keep this at all players, save the changes. It'll show up there. You can edit this with your character art, and then we can set up a token for them later. In fact, I might even show you how to do that quickly in a short moment. But then as they go in, they'll have the option to use the character mancer, edit the sheet directly, create an NPC. You'll be creating the NPCs, obviously, but that's easy. If you're starting, I'd recommend using a module. So I'm not going to show you how to create an NPC sheet, but it is pretty stock standard. It's pretty easy. So from there, we're just going to drag Jack in there so he's in the PC page, and that goes away nice and easy. So let's start by going into our map and background layer. I'm just going to grab a single image here. I'm going to drag this right in, and this is going to be a nice little splash screen for our players. They're going to come in, they're going to see this little dockyard with the ship. I'm going to use my select tool, bring this up, drag this all the way over, and that'll take a moment, and then that'll redo its own image, I believe, unless this is a really low resolution image, but I think it should be fine. It might just be loading in. We're going to go to our page settings. So just by pulling this down, we'll be able to see all of our different pages. This will fill up in no time. And we're going to go to our page settings, and I'm going to quickly turn off our grid by selecting this little square down here to make it transparent. And then I am going to select the background color and do the same thing. What this will do is we'll only have the image visible here. This looks really bad. So I'm actually, you know what I'm going to do is I'm just going to find a background image I know works fine. Here's another boat. This will be fine. And I'll drag this out and it'll be bigger and everything will look good. Yeah, there we go. Nice and easy. And that'll be our splash screen. Our players see that at the start of the game. Now, let's talk about loading in like an actual map. This will be one that you maybe found online, built yourself. That's all good. I'm going to be using one that I've built myself. So, new map. I'm going to call it the garden. I'm just going to load in like a very, very early map that I created. So we're going to go there. See everything has come back as default. And if we go into the page settings itself, we can see that dynamic lighting is currently off. I'm going to turn that on. Of course, that was the default settings I talked about before. I just kept that all off in case you're not currently using it, which is easy. And I like update when token drop so that people can't sort of like peek quietly around walls and corners. Just avoids metagaming, which is nice. So that's easy. Set that up there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to pick one of the maps that I've made before. I'm going to pick one of the ones that I just made for Vices and Vitriol. I'm going to pick this big town square map and drop that in. Cool. Now that's loaded in. I'm just going to line this up with the corner here. This is significantly... There we go. So this doesn't line up super well. That's because the grid I've made, the size I've made for the map is actually a different dimension. We're going to set that quickly. I'm just going to have a guesstimate at what I set that dimension to. I'm pretty sure I said it's like 40 by 30. Save that, and you'll see that our map does change around. I'm going to zoom out a little bit, and we're just going to drag this back out. Didn't quite get that amount right, but it looks like it lines up pretty nicely. So I think I've guessed very close to what it should be. If you don't like this little white area, once again, it's just going into your settings, selecting your background color, setting to transparent, save settings. You can do the same thing with the grid. I'm not going to fuss about this part down here. But as we go in, we can see that we've got our map. It's nice and easy. If we dropped Jack Smith's token in here, it'll look like a little blocky man, but that's okay. Sorry, you know what? We've actually dropped Jack Smith's token in on the map layer. We're going to go to our object layer and drop him in. And that's easy. Now, you'd want to set Jack Smith's token to be an actual image. In fact, let's do that now. Let's set up his token. So I'm going to go into my PC tokens. I've got a couple set up for my existing players. We're just going to use this one. This is no big deal. Now, the nice thing about setting up a PC token, you only have to do it once. So we're going to set this down to be the size of one grid point. And we're going to go into our settings. And you got three icons that you can edit here. I suggest keeping these pretty consistent. I'm going to set this green one to HP. And we're going to set the character sheet to show Jack Smith's attributes. Yeah, sorry, there we go, HP. Going to set the other one to AC. I like setting AC. And then I kind of use the third one as like a free canvas tool. So if I'm reducing people's max HP, or if I'm tracking XYZ slots or stacks of an effect, I'll use that red one. Otherwise, I could potentially also use it for speed. I used to, but everything tends to have 30. Kind of remember like the 1 or 2 exceptions that don't. So I wouldn't sweat about that. And then once that is done, you can then set up the dynamic lighting settings. I'm going to give Jack vision. He has night vision. It's 60 feet. And that should do it. Jack does not emit any light, so that's easy. So we set that there. We can now even see the area that Jack can see, which is nice. These will be blank because the character sheet doesn't exist yet. But if we go into Jack now, while we have this one selected, if we go into Jack now and edit, I can now use the selected token as Jack's token, save changes. And even if I delete Jack's token, I can drag him back in. And this will be saved, and I can go onto a different page, and I can just do the same thing. So Jack's token is now saved. I can use that wherever I want. If I update it, I just have to remember to save it the same way I did before. So that's pretty easy. So that works pretty well. Control L is a really good shortcut, by the way. Shows everything that the character can see. And that'll work really quite well with dynamic lighting as well. So for example, just looking at dynamic lighting, if I were to, anything I draw in dynamic lighting is going to then create a set of shadows. So if I come back to our objects layer now and I look at Jack, I've drawn this squiggly line. If I just Control L, you can see that the squiggly line now is actually casting shadow and blocking view. And if I move Jack around it, it'll show different areas based on this object that I've written. And so you use that for your walls, your doors that aren't open, those sorts of things. So that's pretty easy. What is left? I suppose then the other pieces that are worth looking at is how to bring things in from your compendium if you need to drop something in. So let's say I want Jack to fight some goblins, right? So I'll type in goblin in my compendium. Give that a second, that'll search, and then I can literally just drag and drop goblins straight in. So once I drag that in, there we go. It takes a moment, but it does show up eventually. There's a goblin there. And if I go into my journal, you can even see goblins here. I'd recommend making like a monsters page, and you can even then like sub-segment if you need enough. But having the goblins in here means I can quickly drag and drop them in, and suddenly Jack is fighting 5 goblins. If I don't want Jack to know that these 4 goblins have begun to ambush him, what I can actually do is I can set them up in the GM info layer. So if I delete these and I go into the info layer, as I drag them in, they're actually opaque or transparent. And what that means is Jack actually can't see the goblins at all, even though I can see them. And he won't be able to see them until I go into the info layer and select them all, or whichever ones I want. And then with a right click, I can go token layer. And now they're visible. So suddenly they spring, and then everyone has to roll initiative. Just very quickly, I'd bring up the turn tracker to roll initiative. I'd bring up the character sheets for the goblins, and by selecting the tokens, I can then roll initiative here, here, and here. You see they populate automatically, and if I hover over, because I selected the different tokens for these rolls, if I hover over, that's easy. Maybe this third goblin gets an advantage on initiative, so I'd actually roll a second time, and that'll actually update the same token. Did it just roll it did roll 2 sets of, hold on. It actually did roll 2 sets of 5, by the way. So that's why this didn't update. So if I did again, there we go. It would update to 15. Once everyone has rolled initiative, you can actually quickly sort by descending, and then suddenly you know which goblin goes in which turn and how screwed Jack is, which is pretty easy. I think the last piece then is to talk about bringing in modules from another game, from let's say an adventure that you purchased. So we're going to quickly jump out here. And what we are going to do is go back into our game settings, and we are going to go into game add-ons. And we're going to select just something that we have. So I'm going to say, let's bring in... Do I have just a whole campaign here? I believe I do. Give me 2 seconds here. Let's bring in something from Call of the Netherdeep. So I can even look it up here. So I can go call, that's the Raven's Call. Does that not bring in maps? Let's have a look. Apologies on this. You know what? Let's bring in an adventure from Ghosts of Saltmarsh. Actually, I know that one works, and that's what you'll generally look at if you get to Curse of Strahd, those sorts of things. I run very heavily in homebrew, so all of my stuff is my own. That's probably not the best way to get started in D&D, as a heads up. So I'm going to select, I think Danger at Dun, Sinister Secret of Saltmarsh. We're going to add that to the game. That'll take a second. It'll tell you that it's been successfully added. And now we can launch back into the game. And because we've loaded this in, I actually have several different pieces now. So we have the start page, ignore that. And now we have 3 maps. So I'm going to go into the Haunted House map, which is the first one that you'd run. And I'm also going to go into my journal tab. And we can see here that I've got this big folder, Chapter 2, Sinister Secret of Saltmarsh. If I go in here, it actually has all the different pieces here that you'd want to look at. You can look at this in the Roll20 Compendium as a web page. It's a lot easier to read. I'd recommend that. But you got your adventure summary, all these different pieces. You've got your named NPCs. You've got all your different monsters that you'd want to run in here. All there, so you can quickly pull up their stat blocks and run them. And then you've got handouts for your players too. So you got a handout for what a hobgoblin is. You've got a handout for what a scout is, just to show them what that looks like. As we roll out here, you can see that in the GM layer, all the monsters are already opaque. So you can, already transparent, so you can see through them. So the snakes here, the players can't see them. The players can't see these numbers. And if we went into the adventure, I believe it's this. No, sorry, actually, if we went into the haunted house here, we can even see, there we go. Number 1 is the entrance hall. Number 1 is here. So this is actually a really handy little guide. And as with all things in Roll20, if you click this top button, it'll actually open up in a different window. You can have that completely separate and on the side, or you could open it up in full screen as well and just see everything. So you can see your full house interior, get all the numbers here, living areas. Anything relevant here is going to be noted for skill checks and your investigation checks. So I believe if we looked at the... I think room number 2 had the magic mouth in it. So if I went to number 2, library room, magical gemstones, shows how much they can be sold for. Okay, it looks like it doesn't actually cover those DCs, but that's okay. There we go. A successful DC Wisdom Perception check will show... The floor in the room above is considerably weaker than it. Yeah, cool. So in this room number 6, for example, the floor in the room above it, so the ceiling that you can see, you can actually notice that the floor will be weaker in that area if you make a DC 15 perception check. Although you might choose to run that however you want. It'll show like swarms of spiders. You'll be able to see those different pieces here. So if they trigger the swarm of spiders, you can quickly click in and see that and roll a stat block and make those attacks. And I think that's pretty much everything that you need to know currently for how that runs. Another cool little tip that you can have as well, if you're running something, let's say you're running just this one centipede here for a combat encounter. I'll just bring this in. It's also, oh my, come back here. So we're just running this one centipede. Obviously you can move the centipede wherever you wish, which is fine. If you hold down your mouse button and then press Q, you can actually measure in specific increments and then total what would happen. And when you let go, it'll actually follow this path for the players. It looks very cool. So I do like running that pretty frequently. It also just makes sure that you're tracking distance fairly, and the players are also tracking distance fairly. I hope that was informative. I'm going to try and trim this down to keep it as easy as possible for you. And let me know if there's anything else Roll20 related that I might have missed that you'd like to know more about. Thanks. Catch you later. Bye.